I think we are live. Um, Hello, everyone. My name is
Hello,
Musharraf Ali
everyone.
Farooq. I'm here to introduce the novelist Tarana Husain Khan and her new book, The Begum and the Dastan, published by Amazon um, in India to great reviews. Um, I was fortunate to read this book in its before it was published, and I was really struck by the beauty of the story, the way the character of the protagonist has been described, and how an old story, of slightly from a time which is not of our experience, of our lived experience, was put together in a way that it's of great interest to a modern reader. And I'm looking forward to having a conversation with our audience, um, who are here, as well as the readers of this book, of this wonderful book. Without further ado, hello again, Tarana, and welcome to the show. And thank you to Kalinga Literary Festival for inviting us here and asking me to moderate this session.
Hello, everyone, and hello, Musharraf Saab. What can I say except that it's a great honor to be in conversation with you. And I have been an avid reader of your books. The Clay and Dust was the first one that I read. And I must say, I loved the translation of Hoshruba and Amira's stories. And looking forward to more such. The Merman, yes, the Merman was really, I was awestruck by the moment. And more than that, it is with great, I really appreciate your generosity in being a part of my journey as a writer. And this generosity is really amazing because I'm an unknown writer living in a small town of Rampur, and I just reached out with queries about Dastan. And then I requested him to read my work, requested him to read the Dastan section, requested him to blurb the book, and my requests just carried on. And he was generous enough to help me along and be a part of this journey. And today, once again, I requested him to be over here with me because I thought that we have had a lot to share throughout the journey of the book. And so he's a very special book fairy for my book. And I'm so happy to be in conversation with you. And thank you, Kalinga Litfest and Westland, for having us here.
It's the first time somebody has called me a book fairy, so I'll remember that. Thank you.
Well, okay, Pari, the Pari, and
Ji,
I don't know what mythical creatures we can talk about now.
right. Always better than being a book demon or something like that. Here is the book, The Begum and the
Oh my
Dastan, the
God.
beautiful cover, which is available through Amazon. And I hope all of you will read this wonderful story. Trana, please tell us a little bit about the story without giving away anything. Just introduce us to what the story is, what were your inspiration, and how you went about it, and then we'll take it from there.
The Begum and the Dastan is actually has at its heart the story of a Begum who's called Firoza Begum. And it is based on true events and true personalities. And it's actually based on the oral history that I heard as a child and while we were growing up. There were so many stories that I heard, and so I began to delve deeper into who was this Begum, and what was her life like. There's always very little that one knows about the women because women are often written off the pages of history, and that is something that always used to disturb me when I was reading history. Very few women actually get noticed by history, but they have their stories also. They are important also in the cultural aspect, in the political aspect, in the social aspect. They probably gave a lot to everything. A lot of women were also writers and poets, and they were singers and dancers and wives, and there were so many stories. And this was one story that just was close to my heart because I it was you meet people who are connected to this person, and that person becomes close to you. And I wanted to write about the story of Firoza Begum, and that's what I started to research on. I met people associated with her or who had heard about her through intergenerational oral memory, and slowly the story was taking shape, but there were a lot of gaps. I went to the regional archives, I went to the Raza Library at Rampur and tried to read history, etc., etc. So it was a whole world that was just coming into focus through my research and through my deeper and deeper inquiry into the whole social, cultural, political scenario of a certain period in time, that is the late 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century. And I just wanted to convey all of this whole world in my book. And so that's how the story of Firoza Begum came about. And it really haunted me for I think it took about 4 5 years for me to write down. And still there were questions, there were gaps. And at the end, I had to add the element of fiction because so much is forgotten in a life. So that's how the
Absolutely.
story started.
Right. We start. We become interested in a character, a historical character, or even a fictitious character for that matter, uh, which we imagine to be in a particular period of time, and then when we start researching, the period opens up, the surroundings of that character opens up, where those lives were lived begin to emerge through historic details, through anecdotal evidence, and we start reconstructing that world. So the world of late 19th century and early 20th century are not all that distant, but how our worlds have changed over the course of the last few decades are have put a great deal of distance between that time, that historical time, and the present. Were there any interesting details about the characters or about their lives, which I'm sure, I mean, characters' lives are the same throughout history. But were there any special features of Rosa Begum's life that you uh, felt were still very much the reality of women today?
Yes, you see, when you keep meeting people, and keep talking to them about certain personalities, like I was talking about Firoza Begum, there would be something common that everybody would say. Like they would always say, "Oh, she had this great temper," and when she used to stand and scream at the Nawab, he would listen. Everybody
Hmm.
just said that it wasn't just her temper that they spoke about. It was that she just couldn't deal with injustice. She would always stand up for injustice, and she was a very and through these utterances and these remarks, and how could this spirited, highly independent lady who lived in the 19th century, how could she be? Now, let me just because maybe a lot of my listeners have not read the story, so let me just start by saying something about the story also. This
Please,
was
yes, absolutely.
basically the story, yeah, just a story of a Begum in the late 19th century. Her name is Firoza Begum. She was of a very noble family, let's say, very protected life, etc., etc. And she decides to attend Savni. In this area of Rohilkhand, we have Savnis, that is celebrating Savan through, there are Eids and there are swings, etc. All of that. So that was the cultural scenario, and sometimes we still have them in Rampur. And the Nawab used to have Savnis at his palace. And here is this girl, and she's just married, and she's a very young girl, and she says that I want to go to the Savni. Now the father says, no, you can't go because he is not a very nice person, and women should stay away from courts, etc. So there was a lot of insecurity around this, the Nawab, etc. But she defies the father, and she does go there. And what happens is that she is, caught in the glittering harem of the Nawab. But how does this highly independent, very strong-willed person deal with the situation? Because she is abandoned by her family and her husband, and she is forced to marry this person, the Nawab. How does she deal with this? How she the important thing over here was that I should not look at her reactions from my point of view as a woman of today. What did the women
Hmm.
of that time think about? I don't want to dress
Absolutely.
them up and in those old clothes, and it should just be caricatures of us. No, this person had
Hmm.
to be different, and I had to understand what she thought. What was so for that thought process, one had to go really deeper into the cultural scenario, one had to go deeper into the literary scenario, etc. What did women think? How were their days? How did they deal with things? What occupied them, etc., etc. So the story of Firoza Begum folds. As it was unfolding, I was caught with this idea that are things very different for us today? Because you see, I have been closely in touch with the young people, young girls and boys of the small town in my life as a teacher. I was earlier a teacher teaching class 11th and 12th. And I realized that a number of girls are facing a lot of situations where their own aspirations are often crushed by their parents who really don't care too much about what their girls want, you know. And so then came this idea that will this story be relevant at all? Will people, read about her at all? And unless it has a sort of a protagonist in the current era. So I would often draw parallels between the two. So yes, what Firoza Begum faced, in certain ways, it reflects even today. If that answers the question, I just went
No, it
off.
does. It
into-
does. It
Yeah.
does. And the kind of despotism and patriarchal values that were extant at that time are still to be found in different shapes, slightly different guises today. So not much has changed in lives, whether of men or women, in that respect.
Yes.
Not a good thing. Yeah.
Yes. Not really. I won't say that there hasn't been changes. There have been changes, and but you know, if I say that okay, there was parda system and there is no parda system now, but the point is that it's not just the physical parda system, but it's the parda around the brains, around the thought process that is there. That we can't do this, we can't
Hmm.
go there. This is not possible for us. So even for these young girls, it was not possible for them to even dream about going to and studying in Delhi University, for instance,
Right.
which is just about 190 kilometers away from Rampur. So, there were a lot of hindrances, and the idea that women should be controlled, that the young
Hmm.
girls should be in control, and the wives should be, in control, and they should be doing what they are supposed to be doing and nothing else. So, in those ways, yes, the harems have opened up, but they still exist in the mind. That was one thing that suddenly struck me while I was writing. And why shouldn't life be different for the girls of today? Why should they be hampered in such ways? in spite of their exposure, because with exposure they have a lot of aspirations, but the answer to their aspirations, oh, let's just get them married off and then they'll settle and things will be all right, just give them some basic education, okay, send them to schools, maybe a local college or whatever, and then just get them married off. So it is amazing that it still exists today. Not that everybody is like that, but yes, I should say majority of young women in small towns face very similar patriarchal rules, and that is something that was disturbing me throughout. And somehow they found resonance in Firoza Begum's story, and I just wanted to just draw out these parallels.
So, if I were to ask, what would be the over overarching themes of for the story, how would you describe it? Is it a story about a promise that was lost, or something that was redeemed, or something along those? I mean, how would you put the story in its? How would you describe the story in its essence for you as
I,
a writer?
for me as a writer, it all began with the idea of the variation of shape of a town, which I was seeing around me. How the shape of the town was changing in the image of the rulers. That's how it all began. The idea of despotism, the idea of patriarchy is how I would define my story. And how it affected the women. It affects the town as the outer shell and the women living over there as the inner shell. And that is the core of the story. I think patriarchy and despotism would define the story. It is very interesting that I try to mirror the similar thing with the Dastan with the Dastan, that this is what happens in Dastans, and this is what is happening in our lives. Yes.
Right,
So
right.
so it is that kind of a story where there would be patriarchy, there would be despotism, and there would be the women who are suffering and who are not just suffering. My women are not pitiable creatures. They suffer, but they cope with things. They negotiate, and they sometimes take revenge also, but they have to be true to what they feel. See, a lot of people just ask me, is it about feminism? Is your story a story for, is it based on feminism? What is feminism? What was feminism for the women of 19th century in a small town like Rampur? Of course, feminist movement had begun, but did the women know about it over here? Were they truly free? Did they even think in a feminist way? So, feminism is defined by women throughout because they are intelligent enough to define it. They are intelligent enough to feel what what should be there for the younger protagonist in present day. It is having equal opportunity. For Firoza Begum, it was her freedom, the freedom to practice and her religion, the freedom to live the way she wanted to, the freedom to marry off her daughter to somebody that she wanted to. So women will define feminism in different ways throughout history. So I would not I would say it is about gender. I would say it is about patriarchy and despotism. But yes, it is defined through different stages of history in different ways.
Okay, so we have you mentioned the fictionalizing certain events in history too, because information gets lost, or in the interest of the story, we have to fictionalize. So there's a question here from Aditya Bharat, and the question is how much dramatization you have added in the real events.
Yes. So I should say now over here I would like to say that you have this image which becomes clearer and clearer as you approach the object, as you start discovering things. Things become new, clear, but there are always gaps. What exactly happened? For example, I didn't know how did she die? How did she die? That was the question that just went through my head again and again, and I went to people, and they would have different ideas about how did she die. Till finally I did find out, and I found out irrevocable, let us say, proof in the official records about how she died. So I think it is a lot of it is, of course, about adding fiction into the story, because you know there are gaps, but the overarching theme and the arc of the character should stay true to the character. That's what I believe. uh, she would have that arc. That arc was important. That arc of true events is important.
Right. So, Prana, at this point, would you like to read any passages which describe uh, Firoza Begum's uh, story? Any favorite passages that you would like to read
Yeah,
us?
so I do have a passage that I would like to read, which kind of describes a certain scene, which is like kind of a sort of a suspense in the story, because it is a scene where Firoza Begum, who has gone to the Savni, has actually met and insulted the Nawab, and she doesn't know it's the Nawab. Now when she attends the mehfil, where the Nawab is there, and she suddenly realizes that the person that she had insulted was is actually the Nawab, and she is just terrified. She is just terrified. So this is one passage that I would like to read. There are
Sure.
stories, whispers, and then there is the truth. My story can draw from any of these or from all of these. That evening, Firoza Begum and her family entered through the ladies' entrance to the Darbar Hall of the Benazir Palace. It led to a gallery that ran around the hall, shuttered with split bamboo curtains hanging on elaborate arches to shield the ladies from the male eyes. A eunuch ushered them to their seats to the right of the royal throne, where they had a good view of the proceedings. The lights in the viewing gallery were low, such that only the silhouettes of the ladies with a gleam of color could be discerned by an attentive male eye. Firoza sat close to the frieze, peering at the hall resplendent with glittering chandeliers, turbaned kings, bejeweled in their long jama kurtas, the noblemen and British officers in their smart trousers and red coats with badges and insignia. The musicians were seated at the center on a platform, with Munga Jan, glamorous in her red and gold dancing costume, lit and ready, her tinkling feet beating a rhythm. The chobdars or mace bearers entered the hall and announced the arrival of the Nawab, reciting his high sounding titles: Amirul Umra, Farzande Ala, Daulate Inglishiya. Everybody rose from their seats, and the British officers tucked their black hats under their arms. Munga Jan bent double with her salam. Zubaida Begum asked Firoza, now Zubaida Begum is the mother, asked Firoza to get back to her seat. Ammi, no one can see us from outside. Let me just look at the Nawab once. The Nawab entered with quick, impatient steps, his head surging ahead of his body, flanked by the British agent and the chief minister. The British and Pathan officers followed. By any standards, his frame was unimpressive and puny, but clothed in a cleverly padded, flesh colored brocade sherwani, the ruby glooming at his surpage and the pearl and diamond strings covering the pigeon chest created a dazzling aura of royalty. The Nawab turned to speak to his chief minister, the immaculately clipped moustaches quivering with his smile. It was an unremarkable face, imprinted with an arrogance that befitted all the tales of despotism she had heard whispered about him. Bibi, it's him. Tabu clutched her hand and whispered. He knew her. She had insulted the Nawab and identified herself as the daughter of Mia Jan Khan. So this is what how she feels about it. And this is not a movie where you have this kind of a cheered chart leading to romance. It's the reality, the gritty reality is that it was a terrifying time for her. After that, she was kidnapped into the harem.
Right. Um, there was another character you mentioned when we were having a preliminary conversation about it, about the story. Amira. Um, Tell us about Amira and what is her role in the story.
So Amira's story takes place in 2016, that is modern times, and she is the great granddaughter of Firoza Begum. She is listening to the story of Firoza Begum. The whole book is about the Dastans. So here's the Begum and here's the Dastan, and that oral tradition of listening to stories. I'm sure you must be also remembering when we were young we used to have this some elderly lady or some person, nani, dadi, or somebody, narrating tales to us. That was our entertainment. She is listening to the story of Firoza Begum, and she is herself, trapped in her home because her father has not been able to pay her fees, and moreover, because of certain financial circumstances, and they really don't care about it that she should go to school or she should get educated, etc., etc. This idea of Amira Begum came from certain circumstances that I have seen my young students face over so many times, and that helplessness that one feels trying to help out these young students. Amira was the toughest storyline to write because corresponding it with Firoza Begum was very difficult, and everybody who read the story, not you, everybody else, because you went ahead with it and you were okay with it. But there were a lot of people who said, "Why do you have Amira? Why can't you have just a story of Firoza Begum and the whole social and cultural atmosphere?" But my question was, why would anybody care for the story till it has some echoes today? Because I feel those echoes, right? I have experienced those echoes today. I've experienced the helplessness of these young girls. And you
Hmm.
would be surprised that a lot of young readers have written to me and said that,
Identifying with.
yes, they have identified with this story because this is closer to them. And, maybe they haven't faced similar situations, but the questions are there. Why are there different rules for me and different rules for my brother, for instance? I think
Hmm,
every
hmm.
girl in India or maybe the whole subcontinent would have the same questions that I had. My daughter has the same questions, and it things should change. So I think that was the idea of Amira, and I wrote and rewrote her several times before I could kind of meld her into the story of Rosa Begum, because there was so much happening in Amira's life. Every time I picked up the pen, there were so many things that were happening to her, and I had to tone it down because Firoza Begum was more important than Amira, or let us say that she was just reflecting on what was happening in Firoza Begum's life rather than having a whole thing happening, which was actually happening in her life. In my mind, it is happening in her life, but I just couldn't put it over there. Just got too involved in Amira's story then.
Right. So now, please tell our listeners and viewers, what role does the Dastan play in this story, and
Okay.
how did you how did you find that connection and incorporate it in this novel?
Yes, so if it wasn't enough to have two strands of the story, one is Firoza Begum and the other is her great granddaughter listening to her story. I added a third strand, and this was the last strand that I added into into the book, and that was Kallan Mirza, who is a Dastan living in the same time as Firoza Begum. And he is he gets to like people do know what is happening in the life of the Nawab through, of course, rumors, etc. He gets to know more and more about things that are happening in the harem. And he's extremely disturbed because he's a very, very sensitive Dastan go. He's a storyteller. How did Kallan Mirza happen? Actually, Kallan Mirza himself was a real person. He was a real Dastan go. And as I was researching on the culture of Rampur, I realized that there was this Dastan go who was living very close to my husband's ancestral house, and we don't know what happened to him, or we do not even know exactly which was his house, but we know that he lived in this right in that mohalla. So Kallan Mirza just came to my mind, and he was just totally fully formed, and he just stepped into the story. And I think he rescued the story from being just a very, very drab story, because he came with his dastan, and the dastan was like all Amir Hamza dastans, just fantastic, with putties and demons and sorcerers, jadugar and jadoo, and lots of all the things that you know about, that you've written, so translated so beautifully in Hoshruba. And that was the interesting thing, was that we used to listen to Dastan, it seems, till the 1960s in Rampur. That's what I've come to know, that there was this whole social and cultural setup where people used to sit and listen to Dastans by Dastan goes. And this is something that just came to an end. So again, that was something I had a very close, deep connection to Kallan Mirza, who narrates the Dastan of Firoza Begum and changes the names. So he is the storyteller. Because I truly believe that it is with storytellers like you and me, who have to bring out the stories of our times. We have to tell the people the stories of our time. That is our moral duty, and we have to, even if it is fiction or non-fiction, we have to portray it,
or made up.
right? Yes,
Right, of course.
whatever it is, but it would reflect the truth, right? So
Indeed.
the Kalan Mirza story of Firoza Begum was to make people aware, look at what is happening around you. This is what is happening around you. So that is
Would you
how
like
Kalan
to
Mirza step.
Right? Would you
Talk
like to
about.
read something from Kallan Mirza's part where he's narrating the story
Oh,
of the interior of the palace,
okay. So
or any
I
other
just.
passage?
Oh, okay. Let me just see if some part where he gets together, people, and how he sits and starts narrating the story. So
Sure.
Mirza Amiruddin Dastan Go, nicknamed Kallan Mirza for his dark complexion. We are such colorists, we still are. Um, Wrapped the thin cotton and wool quilt around his shoulders, shivering a little as he trudged through the uneven brick lane from his house towards Gher Mardan Khan for the Dastan session. The dust from the sweeper's brooms had increased the opacity of the misty evening. He raised his hand intermittently, greeting his neighbors, acquaintances, and distant relatives on their way back from work, or sitting in tea shops by the roads. On such days, he could almost believe that he had left his nigar cooking his invariably late dinner, throwing a warning at him to return on time. He used to laugh at her sarcastic remarks when he slept over at his host's house, curled up on a takht, too high on a fiend to walk back. Life was a secret joke that the two of them could cheat with complicit trickery. When his stories got muddled up beyond solution, Nigar would come up with surprising ideas to resolve the cliffhanger of the day before. Kallan traversed the gullies of his childhood and reached Kher Mardan Khan. He touched his forehead in greeting, smiled, and took his seat on the tuft facing his all male audience. Mandated by age and social standing, some were seated on the tufts like him, and some on the white chandni sheets spread on the ground. The hookahs were primed for the long dastan session. Kallan's most remarkable features were his expressive eyes and thick mobile eyebrows, on a forehead that could be classified as noble if it wasn't so dark. He wore his hair long, thick, and curling on his shoulders, and was clean shaven except for his clipped mustaches under an unremarkable nose. His bearing and stylized Urdu were the only indicators of his Mughal lineage. The courtyard of Ghair Mardan Khan was brick-laid rectangular area large enough to seat 100 people. Kallan took out a silver box from his pocket, opened it to extract a tiny black ball of afim, wrapped it in a muslin cloth, and put it in a silver bowl. He then filled the bowl with water from his lota, slowly rotating the muslin to ensure that the afim was dissolved. He preferred to make his own mixture, its potency dictated by his mood and the scene he was going to narrate. A war scene required a higher plane of intoxication than a romantic one or an ayari means trickery narration. It was well known that Mirza Kallan's memory, imagination, and kalam heightened with afim. Even with a high dose, he never appeared intoxicated or muddled up. His grip on his dastan and its characters were legendary, as was his encyclopedic knowledge of food, dress, armaments, and other matters crucial to the tale. So this was the scene that was there at the Dastan session, and it is amazing that all this was going on till the 1960s in Rampur and possibly in all of this area of Rohilkhand and the small towns of Rohilkhand, where people had the time that they could sit and listen to Dastans.
Right. Moving on to more stories, I came upon a very interesting article about a book club in Rampur, and that article was written by you, and it was published in Scroll, I believe. And when we were discussing the book, you mentioned that when we were discussing your next work, you mentioned that it may have something to do with the book club that you organized, if I remember correctly. So,
Uh,
uh,
this was the article on.
on the book club,
Oh, on the book club. Right, right, right.
yes, yes. So, please tell us something about this book club, how it started, and how it is linked with your future writing projects.
Okay. So it was 2016 when I just left my job and decided to launch into a career, a full-time career as a writer. That was, I think, the toughest decision that I had to take. Um, but I had to have more time to do my research and more mind space to do my writing. But it was a lonely process, and so I started contacting, people whom I had known either through college at Aligarh or through their acquaintances and intergenerational family relationships. And we got together and we started this book club in Rampur, which is running still. And every month we used to have. I'm saying used to because of COVID, we are not meeting face to face, and I think that is very sad. So anyway, we used to read a book every month, and then we used to discuss about the book, and slowly and surely it just became more people joined in. It became something that just kept us all together, and through highs and lows. And I think it was very important for me because I used to really hesitate in saying I am a writer. You know,
Hmm.
it was so difficult. Are you a writer? What have you written? Well, nothing right now, but I am writing. So I think for all aspiring writers, this is it's a very lonely journey, which I had not anticipated, especially when I was so busy with school and I had my life was around the students and it was such a lively place. So I think the book club really sustained me through all of that. After that, I started because my journey of learning about my own town had started. And so we started having these heritage walks, and I took my book club mates to all these places, which of course they had been to, but they hadn't known so much. Sometimes you don't know much about your own town. That's a very, very strange thing. And all the lovely stories that I had read about, and then the husbands also joined us in, and they had their own stories, and so slowly it just grew to become such a lovely little book club. And I hope very soon we should meet face to face. We don't like Zoom meetings so much, though we are
Right.
reading and we yes, but it was and now I have realized that these ties are so important today, and how we are really bereft of these ties, because we when we say, oh, I spoke to that, we actually haven't spoken, we have just chatted
Hmm.
on WhatsApp probably. So my recent book, my upcoming book will be something around my book club, and it is going to feature my book club friends also. So that's going to be
Okay, great.
fun.
Yes. So, are there going to be any murders or?
No, no, no murders.
Because you mentioned going to be tough, so
It's a
I wondered.
journey.
Okay, all right,
Okay, it's going to be fiction. I'm not going to take the characters. Oh my
right.
God, that should be another story. I won't have any friends left soon.
If it's a really good story, then it's worth trying. I think it's okay. You'll find more friends.
No, you can't. I think getting friends is
Okay,
a very very tough time.
right. So, do tell us about something about your favorite childhood reads, and do you still reflect on those on that kind of writing or that kind of fiction, those stories nostalgically, or you have moved on from that period, or you think that no, those were the really good stories which left a lasting imprint on your mind, and you still recall them or pay tribute to them in some way through your fiction.
Oh, that my actually I grew up in a very in a huge house which had several generations of people, and everybody had left. The aunts had gone married, somebody passed away, so everybody had their own books, and so the whole house was filled with lots of shelves with books from dating different generations of people. And there was everything that was the only entertainment we had, and I was a voracious reader. I loved reading. Growing up in a small town, the important thing was the stories, right? So, like when I was 13, or we started with PG Woodhouse. And also, it's very important that our reading, what were we reading, was really looked into by our elders, my uncles and aunts, especially my uncle and aunt. They were very particular about what am I reading. Not just me, but all the young people. Like, you should go from Amy Blyton, then Roald Dahl, then P.G. Woodhouse. So there was a graded thing. Then Arthur Conan Doyle would come in, and then a little bit Romance of Georgette Hare and all of that. So we were guided in our reading as we were in everything else. This is something that is really missing, I feel. At least I haven't seen much of it. um, now people getting so involved with reading because we don't have that kind of a desire to read anymore because of the easier entertainment. There's just so much of entertainment all around. Why would a person want to sit and read? So anyway, I used to love. I read Rushdie. I just fell in love with Midnight Children and D.H. Lawrence. And at there was a time when I was crazy about classics, and I Austen and the Bronte sisters and all of that era of learning to write, or really attempting to write with that style, you know, which was like a dated style. But anyway, we read a lot of that. But as time goes on, your tastes become more mature. And I have, of course, I still read Rushdie. I have read a lot of Indian, Pakistani, and Iranian, Afghanistani. I love all South, Spanish, Central American, Marquis, and all of that. I think just having what really attracts me is that mix of culture and history, that description, the characters, you know, Isabel Allende. Sometimes speaking of Allende, sometimes I feel that it's the conflict all around that somehow brings out a lot of emotions and writing skills. So I still enjoy reading, but most of the time I'm reading people who are writing in the same genre. So that has become somewhat of a habit, because when you write, you really want to know how others are writing, or the
Right.
similar books. So that does happen.
So,
I enjoy.
is it historical fiction that you mostly were reading when you were writing Begum and the Dastan?
Yes.
And okay,
Oh, I
right,
was I was reading Tilisme Hoshruba. First I read Hoshruba in English that I translated, and then to get that sense, that rhythm of the dastan, I read it in Urdu on Rekhta. I think Rekhta has done this wonderful work of scanning
preserving. Yes.
yes, tilisme hoshruba, and putting it on for everyone. So I love that rhythm of writing, and those little jokes, and the characters, and so many characters that just come in and go out, and that suspension of disbelief. And those mythical creatures that we spoke about, the Pariru and the Simurg, and and knowing
Mhm.
about them, that I often asked you about them also. So it's a different world. And then, you know, in that whole cycle of the good versus evil, and how the magician creates a world, was my story, because I created somebody called Tariq Jan. Tariq is means blackness, Jan is Jan. So person who's black of heart, he's a despot, and he has created this magical world of Tilisme Azam. Now he's whatever he's created, people believe in it. So
Hmm.
as I was creating this, and how he kidnaps Lala Rukh, which is a mirroring of Firoza Begum's story, in a fantastic way, with everything. So it just developed from there, and I just got so engrossed in this whole dastan that it just became. It actually, I had to edit about 50,000 words of it. That's how big it became. Because once you get into it, you just keep, making up the story. It just becomes so alive, and it was so colorful and
Maybe
alive.
you can separate that and write that as a separate standalone book.
Yes, it was a standalone book. That's how fantastic it had become. But I love this style of write. I love the way it just flies off. You just keep writing. You just don't care what's happening. You just don't care about character arcs or whatever. The good will come. Good will conquer evil. You know that there'll be a final battle. The
Hmm.
outer framework is already there, and inside it, you just let
The
your
fun of
imagination
narration,
go.
right?
I don't have a theme, but I can understand that's what you
How it
feel
kicks
like.
in,
Yeah, how it kicks in. Yes, that's what was happening.
right? Tarana, please, you have another book forthcoming from Penguin, I believe. This is
Yes.
later this year or early next.
Yes, so I have another book coming, because I also write non-fiction, and I write on Rampur culture, Rampur cuisine as well. I have translated Persian manuscript on cuisine, and I'm working on a project called Forgotten Foods, Culinary Memories and Lost Varieties, or Heritage Varieties of Rice in India, which is a project by the University of Sheffield. So, in this process of writing about researching cuisine and culture, I started writing these little personal essays, and they somehow became, people really love reading them. I'm not a very big cook. I'm not a great cook at all, but I love writing about food and the
Food.
culture around food. What is the cultural significance of different dishes? And when I had written quite a few articles, now this is a book that Penguin is going to publish, is about the culture of Rampur and the cuisine of Rampur, the cultural significance of different dishes in this
Right.
place. I think it will have a lot of resonance for most people, because in India as well as Pakistan, Afghanistan, I think the whole subcontinent, I think there is a lot of cultural significance given to different dishes, and how they are served, when they are served. Maybe it's there in all cultures. I think it's there in all cultures. And tracing the history of these dishes, that has become a
Before the
passion.
before the before the time of the packaged spice mix,
Sorry?
in which before the time of the packaged spice mixes, like all these spices that you get in a packet and just throw in everything
Oh,
together and
yes. Yes, yes. Before we abbreviated everything and just decided to eat whatever comes our way. But I think people really want to get back to the original. It meant that half the day was making
spend
masalas
cooking.
all the time. We were doing masalas all the time, but I think the end result was really amazing. I think we have lost out on a lot of these sub procedures and these techniques. So maybe my book will bring um, that back. This book will be out in April next year.
In April next year. Okay. And
Yeah, it
we
will
have the
also have
title.
some. Um, right now, I've just called it Rampur Cuisine and Culture, and I
Okay.
think that's the working title. But I'm sure I'll think of something more interesting. But it is about Rampur culture and cuisine.
Do you want to read anything
So
from the recipes there?
no, I'm not a very big recipe person at all. In fact, what I've done for the book is that I have gathered together recipes from different people. I've gathered
Hmm.
it from people who are you know who know these recipes, who know these old recipes, and actually it's about the recipes that are still being used in Rampur. The Rampur cuisine was a cuisine that people loved, because all the cooks from Delhi and Awadh had come to Rampur in 1857 after the mutiny. And just as a lot of them went with Wajid Ali Shah to Calcutta, in the same way, Rampur cuisine was a mixture of all these Rampuri and Kashmiri and Awadhi cuisines
Okay.
all together. And because you had a Nawab who was ready to have 100 cooks,
Hmm.
so then the cuisine really developed in a magnificent way. Unfortunately, we just lost out on most of the gains of this cuisine. So the project itself is about forgotten foods. And so it is the forgotten foods of Rampur and the cuisine of Rampur that we are trying to recreate. And a part of the project that we are working on is also training the Khansamas, because you see what has happened is that we just have four or five things, wahi korma, kebab, pulao, and just goes round and round and round. So, what about the other things that were there, that were developed? So we want to train the chefs so that they are better equipped to, it's good for their professional development also. And so
Yeah.
that's what I'm working on, as sort of a contribution, let us say, of this project. I'm very happy that we are doing this, and I'm sure it's going to really bring back some of the lost glory of Rampur cuisine. As you ask the old timers, they say, "What do we eat? What are you eating? It's nothing, nothing compared to what
Hmm.
we used to eat." You know. So
Right.
yes.
Right. We took a few questions from the viewers, and a few people just commented on the story that Fawzia Khan said that she felt sorry for Firoza Begum. She suffered a lot. I'm not sure if you agree with this assessment. Um, and some viewers found the speakers very natural, which is a tribute to both of us. And so these were some of the comments that we received. Uh, and will be, I think we have a few minutes. So if there are, if our viewers have more questions, we'll be uh, happy to take them. Or if there is, as a first time writer, as a first time novelist, is there
I
any advice that you would give to other first time novelists? What to avoid? Because I remember that when I was writing my when I after I'd written my first novel, it was my advice to everyone was start with a plot, because I did not have a plot to start with. I mean, I had an idea what to write, but the plot was all over the place. And after that time, I've always started with. I've not written a story for which I did not have a clear plot. Of course, it may change, but do you start with something? So, is there something like that you would like to share with other writers?
Yes, so actually, the earlier stories that I wrote, I was very, I was because I just sat down and read all the books on writing and how you have to write about the character and how you have to bring out the plot and you have to make. I also took up some courses because, of course, you even if you read all your life, you that doesn't make you a writer at all. When you sit down to write, it's a different thing altogether. And especially coming to writing at a very late age. I wasn't writing throughout all these years, though in my mind there were stories all the time, but I wasn't writing. So making a grid, this will happen, then this will happen, then this scene, then this scene. This is the beginning of the scene, this is the end of the scene. Like they tell you in all those books that are about writing. The point is that I realized that this is not how it would be, because I can never predict what would happen at the end. I knew that Firoza Begum, of course, would die. Well, why wouldn't she die? That's how it happens. But I didn't know how I knew her story. Her story came out through the oral narratives. But what was what was her character? How did she react? What did she do? All that the character takes charge. I think. Uh, Most story writers would tell you this, and I realized that much later that it is when the characters become real and they start whispering to you, and you get up in the morning and they're already doing something. They get up in the you get up in the morning and you don't know what they're going to do today, so you just sit down on your table and they've just taken charge and they have just decided that this is what's going to happen
Agenda for the day,
today.
right?
Yeah, that's what they have decided. So
Hmm.
when we just become a vessel, a sort of a transmission of the story, this is the place where a story writer has to reach. It cannot be through grids. It cannot be through all those plots and plotting and
Homework.
planning
Hmm.
and all that homework. That I've done it all. You should see the kind of Excel sheets that I filled up because I wanted to do everything perfectly, but it's never
Right.
perfect. And writing is all about editing, writing, rewriting, rewriting. It just takes a lot of time. And you have to be humble enough to take that correction. And you have to be a learner. That's my advice. Be a learner and read. To all the new writers, and they are such lovely voices. A lot of debut writers are really amazing and brilliant. And how did they do it? I don't know. Uh, if all these young writers could have this sudden voice, but the point is that you have to listen to that voice. The voice of Firoza Begum had to come to me before I could really, really, write
Hmm.
down about her, even though I knew her story. So listen to the voice, listen to the
Great.
characters.
Great. So, with that, I think we'll wrap up today's session. Everyone, thank you so much for joining us for today's conversation. Thank you, Tarana, for making the time for this conversation, for writing a wonderful book. The book is there available from Amazon, The Begum and the Dastan. I strongly recommend all of you to read it. You'll fall in love with the story, with the characters. Uh, Thank you so much, everyone, and
Thank you
thank you
so
to
much,
Kalika.
Musharraf, for really, helping me with this conversation. I didn't know, how it would turn out, but I think it was just magnificent. And thank you so much, Kalinga Lit
Thank you.
Fest, for
It's my
giving
pleasure.
us this
Yes.
opportunity for getting together, and all the viewers. So many of you have posted comments, and I'm just going to go through them now. Thank you so much for being with us and listening to us. It has been a pleasure.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Good night. Bye.